This has got to be the boldest prison break crew in the world. They had the audacity to dig the escape tunnel right in the guard's break room. Upon receiving the tip-off, the prison guard captain, Bellick, didn't waste a second before heading there. He lifted the sofa and the carpet, and sure enough, found a well-concealed large hole in the floor. But just at that moment, Charles from the escape team smacked down with a shovel. But Bellick, being a police academy grad, grabbed the shovel and engaged Charles in a fight to the death. Perhaps driven by a fierce will to survive, the aging Charles grabbed a water bottle nearby and smashed it hard against Bellick's forehead. Finally, Charles knocked Bellick unconscious, but in the scuffle, Charles's abdomen was accidentally cut by glass. After quickly treating his wounds, Charles hurriedly threw the unconscious Bellick into the hole, immediately cleaned up his room, and informed the escape team of the incident.
We gotta get out of here. Now.
Everyone was stunned upon hearing the news. Michael had planned to break out in 3 days, but now they had to act immediately. Once the guards realized that Bellick was missing, they would surely lock down the prison until they found him, at which point they would have no way out. Michael decisively announced the next steps of their escape plan. John was to contact the plane outside to take them away from the country. Benjamin was tasked with getting as much bleach as possible for later use. Everyone else was to find ways to mask their body odor to avoid police dog tracking. He himself would figure out how to get the keys to the infirmary, since the hole in the guard room was blocked by the unconscious Bellick. Escaping from there was no longer feasible. They could only wait until 7 o'clock tonight for yard time, when everyone would gather in front of Michael's cell to escape through the tunnel behind his cell's sink. And with only 1 hour of yard time, they had to make every second count. Sucre didn't forget to remind Michael, "Your brother Lincoln is in solitary confinement, under 24-hour surveillance. Even if you can't get Lincoln out tonight, we still have to go. Don't let so many of us die for one person." Michael nodded reluctantly. By lunchtime, the guards had already started to wonder why they hadn't seen Bellick all morning. Michael, with ears pricked and heart racing, feeling guilty towards David. Michael, knowing full well it was David who snitched to Bellick, still informed David that they were going to break out tonight. Whether to go or stay was up to David. After lunch, Michael took the opportunity while changing bandages to find Sarah and told her his entire plan.
I'm getting my brother out of here. Tonight. And I need your help.
Sarah was shocked to hear this. After calming down, Sarah questioned what Michael expected to get from her. Michael told Sarah that when he first arrived in prison, he indeed saw Sarah as a pawn for his escape, but later, he truly wanted to be with Sarah. Today, he came to Sarah only to ask her to make a small mistake. "Please don't lock up after work." Sarah was in an intense mental struggle. She ran out the door without giving Michael a positive response. After leaving the infirmary, Pope found Michael, thanking him profusely for completing the Taj Mahal model. Pope said, "I owe you a favor, and if you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask."
Actually, there is one thing you can do for me.
Thus, Michael got another chance to see his brother in solitary. Michael revealed his plan to escape tonight. Lincoln told him to leave him alone because he was in chains and there was nothing Michael could do to get him out of here. Michael was torn with agony. If he couldn't get his brother out, what was the point of planning this escape for over a month? John, seizing the moment when the guards were not paying attention, stealthily grabbed 2 handfuls of feces and hid them in his pockets. He then went to his cell and scattered the feces on his own bedsheet. His cellmate was utterly bewildered by John's series of actions.
It's not in a place to question his will. Are we clear?
On the other side, Teabag, during lunchtime, was also collecting beans that smelled like feces. He mashed these stinky beans into a slurry and smeared it on his bedsheets and pillow. You might think they are fools, but on the contrary, they are members of a highly intelligent prison escape team. Tonight, the escape team, consisting of 8 people, is preparing to initiate their plan. They used feces to mask their own scent to avoid being tracked by the police dogs. Benjamin's task was to procure enough hydrogen peroxide, which was a key part of the escape plan, because the escape route would take them through the psychiatric ward. They needed to bleach their blue prison uniforms white. He hid the bleach in small pouches inside his trouser legs, then smuggled it out of the kitchen to distribute to the other members. Now, with only 45 minutes left until yard time, they were getting ready to make their escape during this period. However, as Sucre was bleaching his clothes, a guard suddenly approached. Sucre, frightened, immediately took off his pants and sat on the toilet. The guard informed Michael that Pope needed to see him urgently, seeing the key figure being taken away at this critical moment. The other members showed a look of utter despair, because just this morning, Bellick had discovered the big hole they had dug for their escape. Fortunately, Charles appeared in time to knock him out and hide him in the pipes beneath the hole. They wondered if Pope had discovered this, but when Michael was taken to the office, he clearly heard Pope on the phone with Bellick's family, saying he was not at home today. Pope immediately ordered a search for Bellick in the prison and then called Michael to his office. Fortunately, Pope's concern was not about Bellick's disappearance, and Michael's hanging heart finally fell. Pope mentioned that this afternoon, while moving a model of the Taj Mahal, the supporting beam suddenly broke, and he asked Michael what had happened. Unexpectedly, Michael placed the stolen brace on the table and then pulled out a small knife, pointing it at Pope.
And you're gonna make sure my brother goes with me.
All of this was part of Michael's calculation. He wanted to be summoned by Pope as a part of his plan to save his brother, Lincoln. Michael threatened Pope to call his subordinates and say that Bellick had been sent to the city by him and was safe, and would return tomorrow. Then, he had Pope transfer Lincoln to the infirmary to ensure Lincoln would be there all night. After using Pope, Michael tied him up and hid him in a closet. Finally, he dialed a hotline for an entertainment program and then told the secretary outside that Pope was on a conference call and did not want to be disturbed. Seeing the phone line busy, and because Michael often came and went from there, the secretary had no suspicions. Back in the cell, the escape team anxiously awaited the arrival of 7 o'clock, feeling as though every minute and every second was unbearably long.
Cheer time, 1 hour!
There's no going back now.
The yard time lasts for an hour, during which they must escape from the prison. Everyone, understanding the urgency, hurriedly gathered in front of Michael's cell. As Sucre pulled down the curtain, they one by one crawled into the large hole behind the water tank. However, not far into the sewer, they were met with deafening screams. It turned out that Bellick had awakened and successfully ripped off the tape on his mouth. Meanwhile, 2 guards outside the restroom seemed to have heard the cries for help and hastily turned back. In a critical moment, Teabag quickly crawled over, covered Bellick's mouth, and pressed a knife against his throat.
There's nobody here, man.
I swear I heard something.
Come on, let's go.
After narrowly escaping, Michael stripped off Bellick's uniform and wore it himself. The group of 8 vented the humiliation they had endured over the years.
Shut your mouth. You know he's...
They arrived at a manhole cover beneath the yard. Next, they had to cross the most dangerous place. As 3 watchtowers were monitoring the area, Michael instructed everyone to put on the bleached prison uniforms and left in a hurry after saying, "Wait here for me for a minute." Michael took out a handful of flour from his pocket and gently blew it towards a keypad. After several attempts of trial and error, he finally triggered the fire alarm in the psychiatric ward. At this moment, Teabag, thinking they were being set up, urgently told everyone to turn back.
What, fool, do you hear that?
It's the fire alarm in the psych ward.
How do you know?
I set it off.
Why?
Soon, the inmates of the psychiatric ward began to exit the building, and Michael and his team waited under the manhole cover for their chance. When the control room declared the alarm a false alarm and ordered the psychiatric patients back inside, the escape team blended into the crowd.
Wait a minute.
The manager recognized John and questioned why Michael was there.
Listen, you got that sedative you were talking about?
Yeah.
You got some now?
Yeah.
Let's have it. This'll put him out right. Like a light.
The group safely made it through the sewers of the psychiatric ward and arrived at the infirmary. Here, they successfully met up with Lincoln.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
Uncuff my brother.
Got it, boss?
And I ain't here, boss.
Yeah, even the radio.
However, at that moment, Teabag noticed handcuffs on a chair and decided to take them. thinking they might come in handy later. Unbeknownst to him, these handcuffs would eventually cost him a hand. The group of 9 successfully reached the infirmary door. What remained to be seen was whether Sarah had left the door open for Michael.
We're in.
At this moment, all they needed to do was pull down the anti-theft window in the infirmary to escape over the prison walls using the cable. Michael came up with a plan. He directed everyone to the floor's fire escape to take out the fire hose, one end of which was tied to the anti-theft window. A blanket was laid on the ground to muffle the huge noise caused by the window hitting the ground. The other end was tied to the elevator's handrail, using the massive pulling force generated by the descending elevator to tear off the anti-theft window. However, just as Michael pressed the button to go downstairs, the elevator's sensor system detected an obstruction and couldn't close. Now, with only 15 minutes left until the end of yard time, if they failed to escape within 15 minutes, the rest of their lives for all 9 of them would be over. At this critical moment, David, feeling guilty, bravely entered the elevator and kept his hand on the lower floor button, successfully closing the elevator door. As the elevator descended, the fire hose gradually tightened. Just as Michael had anticipated, the anti-theft window was finally pulled down. Just as everyone was taking off their prison uniforms, preparing to climb the cable, a person suddenly appeared at the door, staring intently at them.
Here I come with. Look, you want me to make a little person-to-person call here?
It turned out to be Michael's mentally ill cellmate, Haywire. Haywire threatened to join the escape team, leaving them no choice but to agree to take him along. Lincoln was the first to climb the cable to deal with the electrified fence on the wall. John suggested climbing the cables in alphabetical order, and since his name was Abruzzi, he was naturally first in line. The others, though angry, could not complain, as they were counting on his plane to leave the country. However, they didn't notice that the bolt fixing the cable had quietly loosened. Lincoln climbed to the wall and laid a sheet over the electric fence. After everything was prepared, Lincoln waved, and the others began to climb the cable one by one. However, at that moment, Charles suddenly couldn't hold on and fell to the ground. It turned out that in the morning's struggle with Bellick, Charles was accidentally deeply cut by glass in the abdomen and was now severely infected. Charles knew he didn't have the strength to climb the cable. He told Michael about a stash of money buried somewhere in a cellar in Double K Town in Utah. The money was not the reported $1.5 million but $5 million. Charles hoped that Michael would take the money and leave half for his daughter, and the rest could be divided among them. Michael solemnly nodded, while Teabag licked his lips greedily. Meanwhile, outside Pope's office, the secretary sensed something was wrong as Pope's phone had been busy for too long. She, along with the guards, entered Pope's office and found Pope tied up in the closet.
I have a code 3 in the warden's office. I repeat, code 3. Patterson base. Right now. No.
Sound the alarm.
Right now.
The entire prison immediately went into lockdown. Guards with dogs searched everywhere for Michael and the others. By then, only 3 people had not escaped: Michael, Charles, and Monch. By name, Michael was before Monch. Michael climbed the cable, with Lincoln on the other side, his heart nearly bursting from his chest. Fortunately, the spotlight from the watchtower did not sweep over them. However, as Michael was about to reach the other side, an anxious Monch couldn't wait any longer and also climbed onto the cable. But Monch, with his body weighing 500 pounds, had just climbed onto the cable when the bolt securing it could no longer bear the weight and fell off. Michael was left hanging in midair. Lincoln reached out but couldn't grab his brother. As Monch got up to continue escaping, the guards had already spotted him. When the warder looked up the cable, Michael had been successfully rescued by his brother. Under interrogation, Monch revealed the names of the 8-person escape team. Pope went to the infirmary and found Charles had committed suicide. The prison inmates, upon learning someone had successfully escaped, all plunged into jubilation. Pope knew that if he couldn't bring them back, he and the entire Fox River State Penitentiary would be forever nailed to the pillar of shame. 12 minutes had passed since the escape, and he gathered all the guards for a comprehensive search of the escapees, even authorizing them to shoot on sight if necessary. Bellick was also rescued from the hole, demanding his subordinates bring him a shotgun, vowing to regain the dignity that had been trampled upon. Pope never expected that Michael and the others were squatting in the bushes not far away. deliberately waiting for the guards to leave before making their escape. The most dangerous place is often the safest. No one would think that the fugitives were not ahead of them but behind them. Moreover, with the various scents of horse manure and stinky beans on them, the dogs could not track them at all. But the problem was Haywire, who was the last to join them and had not removed the scent from his body. Taking Haywire was akin to having a GPS locator on them. Therefore, the group pretended to send him to find car keys and quietly ditched Haywire. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside the car was exceptionally tense. Teabag noticed that John had specifically chosen to sit directly behind him. His intuition was correct. John pulled out a gun from under the seat, intending to kill Teabag in revenge for the throat slash he had received before. But Teabag was prepared. He suddenly pulled out handcuffs and handcuffed himself to Michael.
Think that will stop me? Then I think twice.
Darn boy. You shoot me. Pretty he'll be dragging around 170 pounds of dead Alabama flesh with him. And considering how much you need him to get this little Fibonacci vendetta of yours, huh?
John was counting on Michael to reveal the location of the witness. If Teabag died, Michael would not be able to get far, so he had to hold back his anger for now and head to the airport first. At this moment, they were 5 kilometers away from the airplane's docking point, and boarding the plane would allow them to successfully leave the United States. However, what they did not know was that John had only reserved 3 seats on the plane. That is, apart from Michael and Lincoln, John had no intention of taking the other 4 on the plane. On the prison side, investigators quickly discovered that the door to the infirmary had not been forced open at all. Clearly, someone had intentionally left the door open for the escapees. Pope, using the position of his colleagues in the infirmary as leverage, finally learned that Sarah had feelings for Michael. It was obvious that Sarah had intentionally let them go. However, when the police arrived at Sarah's house, they found her in a deep coma from an overdose of morphine. The police immediately called for an ambulance and took her to the hospital. On the other hand, Veronica, after a long investigation, found that Caroline had bought a villa by a remote lake, which must hide some unspeakable secrets. Veronica quietly walked into the room alone and found a decadent man sleeping. Veronica was certain that this man was Caroline's brother, supposedly murdered by Lincoln. It turned out to be a thorough frame-up. Caroline did this because her brother was originally the CEO of a new energy company. Caroline created the illusion of her brother's fake death to embezzle the company's assets and use the money to support her presidential campaign. Lincoln was just a small sacrifice in this political maelstrom. On Michael's side, in order to avoid checkpoints along the way, they had to take detours, but not long after, the car got stuck in the mud. With only 2 kilometers left to their destination, they had to run the rest of the way. During this time, Michael also ditched David, because he knew that David had betrayed them. Helping him get out of prison was no longer a debt owed. The remaining few came to a warehouse. Knowing that Michael and Teabag handcuffed together could not run fast, Lincoln and the others decided to forcefully open the handcuffs by pinning Teabag to the ground. But Sucre, despite using all his strength, could not budge them at all. John thought it was too much trouble and went straight for it with an axe. And so, Teabag lost a hand. The group of 5 left Teabag behind and ran towards the airstrip, but what they did not know was that police helicopters had already been positioned near the plane. John's subordinate felt something was amiss and had already missed the agreed time. Fearing he might also get caught if he waited any longer, he chose to leave first. When the 5 arrived, they could only watch the plane take off. With police sirens blaring nearby, they could only start a new round of desperate escape.
We run.